Her parents forced me to sign a prenup when I had nothing, then after she cheated, they tried to invalidate it so she could take half of everything I built. Alright, this is going to be a long one. I just need to get it off my chest and put it all somewhere. I'm not looking for sympathy or advice here, just laying it all out. When I first met Melissa, I didn't have much to my name. I was working an entry-level job, buried in student loan debt, and living in a cramped apartment with a couple of roommates. Her family, on the other hand, was doing well. Not insanely rich, not flying private jet to Italy on a whim rich, but definitely well off. They owned real estate, ran a successful local business, and lived in a big home in a wealthy neighborhood. It was obvious from the beginning that there was a major gap in our financial backgrounds. We dated for about a year, and everything felt pretty solid between us. But once we started talking about marriage, things got more complicated. Her parents, especially her dad, were very hands-on when it came to her life choices. They didn't come off as aggressive right away, but they didn't hide their concerns about my financial situation either. They never came out and directly called me broke, at least not to my face, but the message was loud and clear. They pointed out that Melissa was used to a certain lifestyle, one they had worked hard to provide. They brought up how they built their wealth through discipline and careful planning, and how marriage meant blending not just lives, but assets too. Their big concern was financial security, specifically, Melissa's, and what kind of effect our marriage could have on family wealth, inheritance, or business interests down the line. Their solution? A prenup. And it wasn't suggested gently, it was made crystal clear that signing it was a condition if we wanted their blessing and financial help with the wedding. They even picked out a lawyer for me, or rather, they pushed hard for me to use one they personally recommended. Supposedly, this lawyer would ensure the agreement was fair. But it didn't take a genius to realize this person's real loyalty was probably with Melissa's family, or at least aligned with getting that prenup signed without much pushback. Now, they did say I was free to get my own lawyer, but the clock was already ticking on all the wedding planning, and I was under a ton of pressure to keep things moving. I was in my mid-20s, totally inexperienced with legal documents of this kind, and there was no way I could afford some expensive attorney to go toe-to-toe with theirs. The lawyer they assigned to me seemed professional enough, but they mostly just explained the clauses and didn't suggest I negotiate anything. The whole agreement was crystal clear: if we got divorced, I wouldn't have any claim to Melissa's premarital wealth, her future inheritance, or the growth of her personal assets. And they kept hammering home one specific part: I wouldn't even have rights to any future assets I earned during the marriage if they were tied back to my income or investments, unless I met some very narrow and tough conditions. Basically, whatever Melissa brought into the marriage stayed hers. And anything I earned was supposed to stay mine, at least as long as I could prove it had nothing to do with her money. As for marital property division? Forget it. Alimony was either completely waived or capped at a low amount, and only for a short time. The document was set up so that if Melissa ever needed support, it would be temporary, not long-term. I read through it all and understood exactly what it meant. Truthfully, I didn't have any assets to protect at the time, and the idea of building real wealth felt like a distant dream. The pressure to sign was intense. The wedding plans were already in full swing. Melissa acted like it was just a necessary formality to calm her family down, and I felt like I didn't really have a choice. So, I signed it. It was official, witnessed, filed, the whole thing. The early years of our marriage were financially tight, as expected. I stayed in my entry-level job but started exploring ways to earn more. Melissa worked part-time for a while, then eventually took over managing the household as my job demands increased. Her family didn't bring up the prenup again. It was just a piece of paper that got tucked away. I shifted my energy toward trying to build something of my own. I wasn't happy with the slow grind of corporate life, so I started working on a side hustle in the tech space. It meant putting in crazy hours, nights, weekends, and investing whatever small amount of money I could find. Melissa kept things running at home, and even though her family had money, we lived pretty modestly. Small house, old cars, no financial help from her parents except for the occasional gift. And even then, nothing that would count as joint assets. This business idea? It was 100% my thing, my time, my sweat, my risk. And slowly, it started to pick up steam. It didn't blow up overnight. It took years of effort, trial and error, and constant learning. Eventually, I made the leap. I quit my job and went all in on the business. It was a risky move, and we both knew it meant we'd have a stretch with no steady income. Melissa said she was on board. Her family wasn't thrilled, no surprise there, but I pushed ahead anyway. The company grew. Slowly at first, then faster. I found my niche, built a solid team, and kept reinvesting every dollar back into growth. Around our 5-year anniversary, things really took off. We weren't just making revenue anymore, we were turning a solid profit and starting to get attention from investors. My equity in the company, plus some smart investments I made with the profits, turned into actual wealth. Real, measurable wealth. And all of it was built after we got married, completely from scratch. Eventually, I was worth more than Melissa's family. That's when things really started to shift. Our lifestyle leveled up, even though we kept a lid on just how well we were doing. We moved into a bigger home in a nice neighborhood, not quite where her parents lived, but close. We traveled more. Melissa stopped working entirely and put all her focus into managing our increasingly busy home life. The change in dynamics was noticeable. Her parents, who once acted like I was some broke guy marrying into their world, suddenly took a real interest in me and in the business. They started talking to me about investments, asking for my opinion, even complimenting how I ran things. The same people who had pushed that prenup on me were now treating me like a success story. But while the money and status were climbing, something else was shifting in the marriage. Melissa liked the perks of our new life, sure, but she seemed more and more disconnected from me, the person who had actually built it. We were drifting. She had her social life, her hobbies, her role as the lady of the house. I was still laser-focused on growth, on innovation, on pushing the business even further. Our conversations started to feel like business meetings. Just logistics and schedules, rarely anything deeper. Affection faded. Shared goals disappeared. Around the 10-year mark in our marriage, things started to take a weird turn. I began noticing subtle changes in how Melissa acted, nothing drastic at first, just little things. She started becoming distant, guarded with her phone, and often unavailable at times when she usually wasn't. Whenever I tried to bring it up or ask what was going on, she'd either get defensive or brush it off entirely. It wasn't like I had some big, shocking revelation dropped on me all at once. It was more like a slow burn, a series of small, odd moments that started adding up in my mind. Eventually, the truth came out. Not because Melissa admitted anything, but because pieces of information started falling into place from outside sources. That's how I found out she was cheating on me. She had been having an affair with some guy she met through her social scene. From what I gathered, he came from old money, very established family, well off, which I suspect played a big role in why she was drawn to him. Apparently, their affair had been going on for quite a while before I found out. Once I became aware of what was happening, everything moved fast. Melissa's family, who had been all about praising my financial success for years, suddenly shifted back into defensive mode, but now with a totally different agenda. They were no longer worried about whether I could provide, now they were freaking out over how much Melissa would get if we split up. Turns out, this guy she was seeing wasn't some future husband waiting in the wings. He was already married and lived in another state. That probably kicked her parents into panic mode. They realized Melissa might end up with no relationship and no financial cushion if she walked away from our marriage empty-handed. They didn't bother hiding their concern. Melissa's dad called me directly and said we needed to meet, said it was urgent and about the family's well-being. So I agreed. We met at her parents' house. Her mom was there too. It wasn't a friendly conversation. They opened with a few comments about how they knew things between Melissa and me were rocky. They even acknowledged that they were aware of her involvement with the other man. At first, they talked like they were worried for both of us. But it didn't take long to get to what they really wanted to discuss, the prenup. Her dad brought it up. He started by saying that he knew the agreement existed, he'd pushed for it, after all. But now, he argued, everything had changed. He pointed to how successful I'd become, how much wealth I'd built since we got married. According to him, the original purpose of the prenup no longer applied. He said the whole reason for the prenup was to protect Melissa from marrying someone who couldn't take care of her. But now that I was more than capable, wealthy, even, he said the agreement had outlived its fairness. He called it outdated and unfair. Then came his proposal. He wanted me to agree to cancel the prenup. He said we could either destroy the document or replace it with a more reasonable agreement. Basically, he wanted us to move forward with a standard divorce where Melissa would be entitled to half of everything under state law. He framed it like it was the honorable thing to do, because Melissa had supported me, because she ran the household, because we'd been married a long time. But not once did he bring up the affair, or how it might impact her claims. His entire argument focused on my money and how the prenup, which they insisted on, was now somehow unfair since I wasn't broke anymore. Melissa was there during the whole meeting, but she barely spoke. She let her parents do all the talking. When she did chime in, it was only to say that she agreed the prenup didn't reflect our current situation anymore. She didn't apologize for the cheating. She didn't even seem that broken up about the marriage falling apart. Her concern was clearly about getting a share of what I'd built. The message was obvious, she wanted out, and she wanted a sizable chunk of my net worth on her way out the door. Probably to make her next move, whatever that looked like, with more security. I kept it simple when I responded. I listened to everything they had to say, and then I made it clear the prenup was legally binding. It had been written by lawyers, reviewed, and signed by both me and Melissa, with full understanding of what it meant, including how it applied to welfare during the marriage. I reminded them that this wasn't something I pushed for, it was their idea from the start. They wanted to shield Melissa from my financial situation when I was broke. The whole agreement was built for exactly this kind of scenario, one where I went on to earn significant wealth. There was no clause in there that said it expired if I became successful. I told them I'd honored my side of the marriage. I'd worked hard, built a business, and provided. And I expected the terms we agreed to in writing to be honored as well. I wasn't going to tear up the prenup, and I wasn't going to agree to any side deal that ignored what we'd legally committed to. Any divorce proceedings would be handled under the prenup. Period. The reaction I got from them was a mix of shock and fury. They clearly thought I'd cave, maybe out of guilt, or a fear of conflict, or some outdated sense of chivalry. But I wasn't about to be bullied or guilt-tripped into rewriting the past. Melissa's dad's tone changed fast. He went from calm persuasion to thinly veiled threats. He warned me about the possibility of drawn-out legal battles, public exposure, high legal fees, the whole will make your life hell routine. I didn't budge. I told them again that the agreement was clear, and I was ready to defend it. I also let them know that I had already hired my own lawyer, one who specialized in prenuptial agreements like this. Then I stood up, said the meeting was over, and walked out of their house. Things went downhill even faster after that. Melissa filed for divorce shortly after. Her legal team, clearly backed by her parents, came out swinging. They made it known they were going to fight the prenup. Their argument? That the agreement was unconscionable now, given how much money I had made. They claimed I pressured Melissa into signing it, even though she had legal counsel and the whole thing had been orchestrated by her own family. They were trying to paint the agreement as something I manipulated her into, which couldn't have been further from the truth. They also started demanding big alimony payments and a large cut of my assets as if the prenup had never existed. Luckily, my legal team was ready for this. We fired back with our official response, defending the agreement. We had all the paperwork from when it was signed, emails, documents, proof that Melissa had legal advice, even statements from her own parents confirming that they pushed for it. And, of course, the signed agreement itself. We made it clear that the shift in my financial status was the exact kind of thing the prenup was designed to account for. It laid out clear expectations about future earnings and how assets would be handled. Melissa had known exactly what she was signing, and she signed willingly. We also included a brief, factual note about the affair. Not in an emotional or accusatory way, but just to provide context about what had led to the divorce being filed. Depending on the state, that kind of thing may not affect the outcome, but we wanted it on record. But I felt it was important to include all of that as context for how the marriage truly fell apart, and how, while I was still trying to hold it together, Melissa was already angling for a financial exit that completely ignored the agreement we had in place. The legal process wasn't quick. We went through a full round of filings, motions, and court-ordered mediation attempts that all led nowhere. Melissa, pushed along by her parents and her legal team, refused to recognize that the prenup was a binding legal contract. My lawyers methodically took their arguments apart. They presented clear proof that Melissa had legal representation when she signed the agreement. They demonstrated that our financial situations had been disclosed accurately at the time. The contract explicitly spelled out how future assets would be handled, and Melissa had agreed to that. The rise in my financial position came entirely from my own work, my own risk-taking, and my own investments. She wasn't involved in any of that on a business level. She had contributed to the household, sure, but not to the financial ventures that generated our wealth. As for the idea that the prenup had become unconscionable just because I became successful, that's a tough case to make legally. Courts don't usually throw out contracts just because one person ends up richer. That kind of argument only has weight when one spouse ends up unable to meet basic needs, which clearly didn't apply here, especially given her parents' wealth and resources. Eventually, the court scheduled formal hearings to decide on the validity of the prenup before moving on to things like asset division or alimony. And once those hearings began, it became pretty obvious that Melissa's case was falling apart. Her team tried to argue she'd been pressured or misled when she signed, but they were up against her own past actions and her family's insistence on having that prenup in the first place. All of it contradicted the claim that the agreement had been unfair or forced. My attorneys laid out a solid case. The contract was clear, it had been signed with full awareness, and it had stood untouched for over a decade. When it looked like they were about to lose, her legal team tried shifting their strategy. But even then, they wouldn't settle based on the prenup's original terms. My lawyers told me to hold firm, and I did. Then the court issued its decision. The judge ruled in my favor, completely. No ambiguity, no middle ground. The prenup was valid. It had been properly executed, with legal representation available to both sides. All financial disclosures had been made, and the agreement's terms weren't considered unfair at the time it was signed. Most importantly, the judge stated that just because one party became wealthy later on, especially when the agreement specifically accounted for future earnings, that didn't invalidate anything. The prenup held. So that ruling became the foundation for the rest of the divorce. According to the terms Melissa had signed off on, she had waived nearly all rights to my post-marriage assets, including major alimony. Her lawyers still tried to claw back something, some exception or extra payment, but the contract was airtight. In the final divorce decree, Melissa walked away with only what was hers to begin with, her premarital belongings, any personal items she'd bought with her own separate funds, and a small, short-term transitional support amount. That's it. No stake in my company, no share in my investments, no claim to any of the wealth I built after we got married. The very document her family had demanded ended up shielding me completely. And that left Melissa in a tough spot. She'd been out of the workforce for years. She hadn't built a career, hadn't created a personal income stream, and was used to living at a level she could no longer afford on her own. The house she'd been living in with me was mine, and it stayed mine. The lifestyle? Gone. Her parents still had money, and I'm sure they gave her a place to stay. But when all was said and done, she had to start over from scratch. Practically speaking, she walked away with very little. Some would say she was worse off than before the marriage, older, with no recent job experience and no independent assets to fall back on. And to make things even more grim for her, the affair ended around the same time. From what I heard, the guy she was involved with never planned on leaving his wife. He wasn't looking to build a life with Melissa, she was just a fling. Once he realized she wasn't coming into any kind of windfall from the divorce, he dropped her. So she ended up alone, no relationship, no payout. From what I gathered through mutual friends, she moved back into her old bedroom in her parents' house. No income, no job, no real plan. The whole thing, leaving the marriage, betting on the affair, pushing for a financial grab, it all fell apart. Meanwhile, I still had what I'd built. My business, my assets, the life I created for myself. But the marriage? That was done. Over a decade of my life tied to someone who, in the end, didn't value what we'd built together, not really. The whole ordeal, the divorce, the courtroom battles, the standoff with her parents, was exhausting. But it's over now. Melissa was left without the wealth she thought she'd walk away with. Living back with her parents, essentially starting over. And I was left with the success I earned, alone. That's the full story, from signing a prenup because I was flat broke, to growing real wealth, to having that same prenup challenged by the people who insisted on it in the first place, and finally seeing it upheld. No real emotion as I write this now. Just facts. It happened. It's done. And I needed to put it all down somewhere.